Welcome, obviously, and it's great to have Max and Lucy here at our little pooky talky thing in our pooky pop-up, which actually I'm thrilled we did. We didn't know quite whether it was the right thing to do, but it's been a fantastic week. This is day 4, I think. The first 3 days were all trade, so you're a mixture of trade and retail here. So it's nice to have some new faces in. But it's gone fabulously well, despite the fact we're in this far corner of the centre. So when we sat down and thought about who we wanted to talk to, we very much wanted to talk to. We wanted, some like-minded people. We wanted, preferably some those who share our passion and vision for lighting and colour and expression. And so Daisy, who works with us, immediately said, we've got to talk to the Barlow siblings. And so we fired off the email, and very flatteringly and almost immediately they came back and said, yeah, we'd love to. So that's exciting, and thank you and welcome to you two. And just by way of, I'll just be super short on the introductions. Max, first of all, over here. Max is the lighting man and is an alumni of the School of Sally Story, and at John Cullen Lighting. And Sally, as you may know, is sort of the doyen of the grand dame of the British lighting industry. I'm sure she'd hate to be called the grand dame, but on the basis she's still relatively young. But there's no sort of pretty much undisputed, or at least if there are people who disputed, I haven't met them. And you were there for a number of years, and left, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, in order to set up with your sister, and you set up Barlow Design. As it happens now, although you work very much in the same office and together, you've also created Maxwell Barlow Lighting. So Max also looks after a whole load of other clients, which Lucy doesn't necessarily do so. But gradually, Max, you are becoming yourself the grand dame of the lighting industry. And I wouldn't say you are the grand dame yet. You've got many years to go until you get there. But you're making a splash, and you're doing the work you do is sensational, really. So Max will have a lot to say about the technical aspects and the artistic aspects of lighting, which personally I find fascinating. Lucy, you cut your teeth with Mark Gillette up in, I presume, Chester, would that be right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you worked there for, so Mark has been in interior design for years and years. And actually I had a little student this morning. I'm delighted to see he's a cluster of pooky as well. And again, so you worked there for 3 or 4 years, and you moved on, and you set up with Max, and you've been doing some amazing things in the world of colour and sort of dramatic and brave and designs which you wouldn't necessarily have thought possible, but you've done it. And actually, looking through the website, it's great to see these. They're stunningly beautiful designs, so it's great to see that. We'll talk more about that. Again, very short introduction of myself. I'm Rowan Blacker, and why the hell have I got the right to be talking to these design deities? Well, I don't necessarily, but I set up this company about 5 years ago. Well, pretty much exactly 5 years ago. I reckon we sold our first light then. Not because in any sort of desperate businessy way, and I wanted to, saw a huge gap in the market, but simply because I really love lighting, and I care about it, and I understand that the lighting is for me the single most important thing in any design space. You will start with lighting, and I'm fully aware that you can create a very drab, boring space into a wonderful space with the right lighting. Equally, of course, you can utterly destroy somewhere wonderful, a beautiful room with the wrong lighting. And it starts with lighting, and everything else fans out from there. And for many years, I worked with sofas actually, and sofas are important, but they are nothing like as important as lighting. And so I'm loving this journey, and the good fortune was that there was a turn that did turn out to be a bit of a gap in the market, and so we're still here, we're growing, we're loving it, and we're having a good time. So that's us three. And so we'll just crack straight on. Actually, Max, if I just start with you, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, lighting generally can be divided into sort of 2 broad categories. One is the architectural, and one is the decorative lighting. And could you just sort of help us? I'm talking at quite a sort of top level here because you know we're a mixture of retail and trade. So, but can you help us sort of define the difference, specific, you know, the pros and cons of architectural and decorative lighting?
Yeah, well, I suppose the decorative side is what I consider the more interesting side. It's where you get your ambient light from, and the architectural lighting is more what I call the sort of invisible infill, where you create the focus and the accent lighting, and you create those effects and those differences between light and shadow that make the scheme more.
So the architectural lighting is the lighting you don't want to know that's actually there, but it's doing a function. And in a perfect design, you would walk into a space and you wouldn't even notice it.
Yeah, so all those fittings that really came from, because residential lighting design came from theatre lighting, and when they started bringing those fittings into the home, obviously they're very large, but with the invention of halogen lighting, it was able to sort of miniaturise all those lights, down lights, up lights, strip lighting that you could conceal in spaces and create those more dramatic effects.
And halogen's been around for a while. I mean, halogen. When did halogen become commonplace?
So that I think was more in the sort of late 60s, 70s, and then obviously that led up to LED, which sort of came on the scene, about sort of 10 years ago. It became sort of mainstream, and that's obviously created a whole load of other sort of even more interesting effects and from that technology.
And LED has allowed you, again, it's another massive step change in technology. And I mean, you know, one amazing, and I don't think LED gets enough praise for the fact that, you know, in terms of its sort of sustainability. You know, and I think you mentioned to me the other day that LED uses a fifth of electricity.
Yeah, as a sort of rule of thumb. So obviously it's a huge saving. I mean, with it, it's obviously got so much better since it started 10 years ago, but it has brought with it a lot of complications. Unlike halogen or incandescent, which is a natural light source, so it reflects the full spectrum of colours on the rainbow, 100%. The problem with LED is it's a blue light source predominantly, and then they put a phosphorus covering on that chip that gives it its colour. But that means that particularly the red end of the spectrum can suffer, and if you use very poor quality LEDs, it can make reds look orange or even worse, brown. So when it comes to interior schemes, and if you've done a beautiful coloured scheme with lots of amazing colours and patterns, it's so important to use good quality LED.
And there's some dodgy, there's plenty of dodgy LEDs still out there on the market.
But even, people talk about colour temperature and CRIs. Colour temperature is obviously really important, but it's when you do a scheme, it's getting that consistency across the board. So you want all these lamps to ideally have the same manufacturer of lighting bulb and the same colour temperature in them. You could buy a bulb from Philips that could be 2.7, and you could buy a bulb from Tala that could be 2.7, and they can look quite different.
Right.
So it's.
And when you say 2.7, you're referring to 2,700 Kelvin.
Yes.
Okay, and just explain for the uninitiated what a Kelvin is.
Yeah. So that's what they measure the warmth of the light in. So daylight would be somewhere around 6,000 or 7,000. So that's a very white light that you wouldn't want to use in your home. 2.7.
Might you want to use it for reading?
No.
No. In what circumstances would anyone ever use 6,000 Kelvin?
They use it in commercial, in office spaces.
Okay.
And surgery. So in very modern office blocks, they now have the colour temperature of the lighting changes throughout the day. So in the morning you start off at say 5,000-6,000 Kelvin, and then as you go into the evening, it moves into sort of 2,000.
And is this a run with our circadian rhythm?
Exactly.
It is, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So in the evening, you don't want a 3,000-4,000 Kelvin light on when you're about to go to bed. It's not good for the sleeping.
Okay. And anyway, to take it back a bit. Okay, so you've got when you approach a new space and you've been instructed by a client, what's the first aspect you will look at in terms of? So you've got these two types of lighting. You've got your architectural, your visible lighting, so to speak, and you've got your fancy decorative stuff. Do you look at the two together, or how do you approach a space in terms of the lighting?
They are. I know you started off by saying they are divided into two categories, but you definitely need to approach it with both of them in mind. Yeah. So as the lighting designer, I will choose where and what type of decorative light I want to go where, I will then use architectural lighting as that sort of invisible infill to focus light on perhaps a piece of art or a nice piece of furniture or curtains. But with Lucy, the interior designer, or any other interior designer, I will suggest the type of decorative fitting that I'm aiming for, and then they would choose something aesthetically that fits their design. So the two have to marry up.
So you'll give Lucy a spec. So I want decorative lights in the following places, and this is approximate spec. And the colours, for example, or that would be
totally her choice.
Okay, the colours is entirely her choice.
But yeah, position and the type, perhaps a lamp there or a shaded wall like that. I would suggest that, and then Lucy would choose the finish.
Yeah. Okay. And they talk of sort of layering of light and different areas of light in the room. I mean, are you a sort of do you describe your lighting designs in terms of layers and parts of the different light?
Yeah, it's always it's sort of quite confusing to understand what exactly that might mean. But really, the most successful schemes are where you've got lots of small little pockets of light. And it's about, if you imagine when you walk into a room, it's what your eye is drawn to. So, rather than having downlights, grids just lighting the top of your head, to think about where that light's being focused, directly on the walls, which is going to make the space look bigger, and thinking about what you're actually lighting. So rather than just filling the room with light, directing it at art, more nice furniture, the nice curtains, those things, which creates those layers and a far more interesting scheme. And the dimmer, of course, is and I know we've had dimmers for a while. We can now dim everything. We can, the ability to change the colour of the light and to change its intensity over the course of, as you were talking about the offices, which go from bright white to warmer light over the course of the day. But it's now again pretty commonplace that we're able to change the mood through buttons on our wall. Yeah. So sadly, that was what I missed so much about the incandescent and the halogen bulb. Was when you had them on full power, you had that nice crisp white light, but when you dimmed them down, you got that warmth. And that's kind of where LED fell short. A lot of bulbs that start at 2.7, when you dim them down, they can start to look quite grey. But you can now find warm dim bulbs, which kind of replicate that old effect, so that they get warmer as you dim them. This new technology is getting much better. But
technology is moving at a terrifying rate, isn't it? I mean, you would imagine that it's probably already available over there. On the assumption it all comes from China, on the basis that so much of that, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And sorry, Lucy, we've completely ignored you. Because we got waylaid in lighting, let's have a quick look at it. Oh, we're fine for time. So Lucy, in terms of all this sort of this high-tech lighting that we're able to do, and the way we're able to light rooms these days, which theoretically we weren't, a few years back we couldn't do. And I appreciate the difference between halogen and LED, and it's not all pros. There are a few cons as well. But in terms of the lighting that we can do, has this radically affected the way that you again approach a space yourself? I mean, are you able to do things now, or are you brave enough to do things now that you wouldn't have been able to do in the past?
No, not necessarily. I think from my angle, it's so useful working with a lighting designer because, as you say, Max can direct me on what fittings should go where. And then when it comes to my side, which is choosing aesthetically the fittings and the lamps and the shades that you'll use, it just gives you a wonderful opportunity to add in a colour, like you guys do so well, colour and pattern into schemes that they don't necessarily have to match. It's a brilliant opportunity to add in something that might sort of slightly clash, which is what we love to do to sort of give those layered interiors. So as well as layering the lighting, it's layering the pattern and the colouring, and so it's a brilliant opportunity for our schemes, especially as we're definitely more traditional than contemporary. And that traditional aesthetic means sort of having all sorts of things that don't necessarily sort of matchy, which is sort of the antithesis of what we do.
Well, you're traditional, yes, and you're very often classical, but actually looking at these pictures up here, you throw a lot of brave contemporary vibes into it.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that, for instance, that image is for development. So those, when we do develop work for developers, it's a slightly sort of crisper, more contemporary look. Our private clients, when we can get more interesting in terms of what we bring
Sorry,
in.
you can't see what's coming up on the screen, but I'm now having
quite
a bit.
It's hard. It's really hard, as Matt says, to take good photography of lighting schemes, because normally, as you know, you'll always take interior pictures with the lights turned off, because just things look so
we
much
always
nicer.
we take hundreds of lighting images,
Yeah.
and we invariably turn the lights out.
But actually, it's very interesting in these images. Is when you can see what Matt is talking about, how these washes of light at different heights throughout a room can play on and bring a scheme that I would have done, which is that last one with the lacquer walls. How much you can accentuate wonderful features like that through brilliant lighting.
I can see you've been very kind. You've got a few pretty good lights.
Yes, we found lots of pretty lights because
Not okay. Very interesting. And so, have you got to the point? I mean, obviously, you're 6 years old now. Do people come to Barlow and go, "I want a Barlow and Barlow house"? Or because I'm always interested by this, perhaps the interior designer sort of life cycle. Because you start out and you have to entirely obey the brief. You get your first client and they tell you exactly what they want, and you carry out that brief and you produce it for them. And then gradually you're able to express yourself. And then after a while, your own sort of signature, for example, if you go to, I don't know, David Villanara, for example, he's not going to ask you what you want necessarily. Well, I'm sure he will, but you'll start to get what you do. So, at what point in the cycle are you still conforming to briefs, or have you got more of a
it's a good question. I think definitely at the beginning you do what you're told, because you don't have a body of work that people can see. I think it's really helpful as a designer if you've got a beautiful house you've done yourself. That's the best expression of your work. If you haven't got that, we haven't really got to that stage yet. You do have to do what you're told, and actually we've had awful moments when I realised that we've got a client who has never looked at our website. We had one, a footballer, and it was dreadful. I suddenly realised they had no idea what you did. Right. So that is often how it starts. I think now we're lucky enough to have worked with some wonderful clients who we have been able to express our personal taste more. But I'd say we're sort of in the middle. There's definitely things I'm yet to do that I'd love to do when I've got a client who's great enough.
And has there been a particular building or job that you've done which you think was formative, which was a turning point in your career, for example?
Well, the first job that we did was this when was it? It started in 2012, which was this big redevelopment of a listed building on the Strand, and I was sort of totally out of my depth, but it went well, and it got the best price square footage in the area that had ever been, and they sold.
Which is your job, that's a big tip for the interior.
Yeah, and so I think that really put us on the map, because A, it was an incredibly grand, beautiful building, and it meant that we had this initial sort of
and that's job. So as soon as you go out as Barlow, you score a massive building on the street.
Well, we set up the business halfway through that, because I said yes to the job just as someone who was sort of looking for something to do, and then realised halfway through, yes, exactly, we could make something of this, and that's when Max then came on. And I think that's been our USP, because to have an in-house lighting designer, as you said, is so important. That really is our unique selling point.
I think it must be your unique selling point. Well, I mean, there are lots of great things about the business, but to be able to say, we have our own man who does all the designing. We've worked with him forever. We understand exactly. We have to be my brother. Is a major.
Well, it's been very good for me as well, because when I was at John Cullen, they take a very standoffish approach to working with the interior designers in terms of the decorative bits. They very much just draw us a pencil on a plan and leave it at that. Whereas because I worked with Lucy in the interior side, I was able to understand so much better how interior designers worked. And so decorative lighting is so much more a part of my schemes than it was when I was.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
And that we do the designs alongside each other, because often the interior design will send plans to the lighting design and will then put their lights on remotely and then send it back. But the fact that we're sitting next to each other doing it in tandem, I think is, it just works so well.
And I've sort of vaguely asked, well I haven't asked this precise question, but does the lighting bit come first, or do you begin, or do you look at it sort of holistic?
No, it has to come last.
It has to come last.
So in a perfect world, the interior designer would have done all the layouts and as much detail as possible. I mean, in a perfect world, the whole house would be completely designed, but nothing would have been built yet.
Right.
And that, as a lighting designer, is, I mean, it never actually happens, but that's the sort of best moment, because I want to design my scheme around the interiors rather than the other way around.
But from time to time, you'll come to a project where they're not proposing to do a complete refit. They're not going to change the shape of the rooms. You know, yes, they'll change the colour, but you know, and also they don't want you to start, you know, tracking new wiring into the walls. So you know, that's a different process, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's you know, every job's very different, and obviously you do. You know, there's a practical element, and obviously you've got to fit in the scheme around what the client wants, where the building's at, and what the interior designer then designs. You know, everyone's different.
But there's moments, aren't there, where, for instance, you get really excited if we say we're doing lots of joinery in a dressing room or in a sitting room or whatever it is, and at that point, even in the early stages, you say brilliant, and you're already thinking of interesting ways we can light that joinery, materials we might use on doors, so you get a bit of light seepage through, and you know, so early on, the lighting can actually impact the design, definitely.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's about working together, I suppose. But you know, the layouts. I like the lead to come from the interior designer, but then I make suggestions around their overall design. Those are the best things.
I mean, obviously, one of the huge questions is what colour are you going to paint all the rooms, and in doing that, presumably that affects the lighting design. And for example, if you're going to have a dark colour like you have in here, you're going to have to light it in a very different way.
Yes. Yes, obviously if it's very dark like this, it's going to absorb a lot of light, so you have to take that into account. But really, you know, Lucy has always used a lot of colour, so just the quality of the light's always been very important. You know, again, you do have to invest in LED lighting and trying to persuade a client that spending £100 on a downlight is worthwhile when, you know, they thought that
when they're a size of W big.
Yeah. But you know, if you buy cheap, it kind of, as you said earlier, it just spoils the whole scheme because the colours look rubbish. It looks flat. It's
stark.
Yeah.
And in terms of colours, Lucy, the world's getting braver, isn't it?
I think so. I think because you know, the pendulum swung and it has gone back to a love of more traditional interiors. With that comes colour. And of course, there's still people who don't. I mean, you know, talk to Maxwell Barlow, you know, they're still doing what they do, and it's amazing. But yeah, there is definitely a hunger for colour again, which is. And
clash. You mentioned clash earlier on. You know, to clash is good.
I think so. I think matchy is lazy designing, and it looks new and soulless, and so clever clashing, I think, is what makes interiors interesting and look more organic, more lived in, and sort of quiet over time, which is always something we try to strive for.
So that's another aspect of your design. You want people to walk into their house and it wants to have the sense that they've lived there for many years.
Absolutely, in a sense of who they are, and you almost want to not. I think you don't want to obviously look like you've had an interior designer, which is.
I'm not bored. I'm just checking. I'm checking my messages. Because actually, what would be quite nice to do is to throw, you know, if anyone had it. Actually, from now on, if anyone wants to say anything or just join the conversation, because we've got officially 7 minutes left, so don't feel, you know, I'd love you to join in. Where were we? We were talking. Oh, we were talking about the aspect of your desire for people to, you know, to design something which looks lived in, looks old, and looks a part of them.
Yeah, and that's where, to plug your brand, it's so brilliant to have Pookie around and people like yourselves who, you know, you can throw in a seemingly random colour into a scheme through a lamp or a lampshade, and immediately I think makes a room pop, makes it more interesting and eye-catching, and it's such an wonderful way to be able to do that.
Well, our view on that is you can radically change the look and feel of a room with the most basic tonic, which is change a couple of shades.
Yeah.
And a couple of light bulbs, I guess, as well. And you change the light, you change the look, you change the feel, you change everything. And actually, if you get it wrong, you send the light bulbs. So you send them back.
Yeah. Just don't take the wrapper off.
Yeah, don't take the wrapper off, exactly. So does anyone actually have any questions they'd like to fire to the Barlow twins? No, they're not twins.
I was going to ask, I work in architecture, and I work a lot with property developers, and I get sort of called in at the end, and it's all very bright and very spotlights everywhere. It's really difficult to create atmosphere. And
Yes, I know that problem.
Really stark, and often as a budget, and lighting is not my expertise. And I sometimes feel really isolated and scared to make decisions. So, are there, it's really thought-provoking that the importance of lighting really come through today for me. So, are there a body of lighting consultants? I know you've got like Farrow and Ball and have their colour consultants who come out. Is there, I think it feels like there's a need for lighting consultants who can work independently with the interior designers.
Well, that's me.
But you just do it for your own company.
No, he does it independently as well.
Yes,
So
she's
the-
independent lighting designer.
You started out together, and then actually realised that in fact, whilst you would do all the work for Barlow and Barlow, you could probably work for a few other people as well.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
you do the both.
Yeah, so I'm independent, so I would work with the interior designer and can come along to a situation like that. I mean, it happens all the time, sadly.
Developers
Do
go
criminal
so
things.
wrong, and it's too late then to be able to do anything.
But it's always a solution, and sometimes it might be just asking them to just take a load of the lights out. But yeah, exactly, putting it off. But you can, I could come and work out how it's controlled and what they've installed, and work out a solution to try and obviously make it better, and work with the electrician, trying to find. Obviously, you don't want to be digging holes in all the walls, but trying to find solutions to maybe add light where it's not, and take it out where they put too much in. But yeah, there's always a solution.
But there's more than people like you. There are plenty of people like you. You just happen to be the cordon bleu of the industry.
Exactly.
There are ne'er-do-wells. They're around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is hard though when you come into a development too late to be able to do things to the lighting, because as we've said, it can just ruin a whole room. It is very then hard. But yeah, with beautiful wall lights and table lamps and floor lamps and stuff, you can sort of even it out, can't you? By getting the light at different heights throughout the room. Not just coming glaringly from the ceiling.
Wall lights is an interesting one. I mean, we're a newish company, and we hadn't really heard of wall lights when we started. And then after 18 months, we decided to have our toe in the water. And I mean, my sense is that wall lights are having the most unbelievable resurgence, and they are massively in vogue. They're a bit of a hassle to fit, that's you. But I mean, are you getting this feeling as well?
Yes, definitely. And I guess it's quite traditional, isn't it, to have wall light sconces or how rooms were lit, for hundreds of years. That was how it was done. So it's that hark back to the kind of English country house style, which we love so much. And yeah, they do such a good job, don't they, of bringing a light to sort of eye level.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, because the downlight was so bastardised, everyone's so put off by it, because it's just developed, which is ruined the whole experience. That people are so against them that decorative lighting is where everyone's going. The downlight is just one tool, and it's very useful when used correctly, but it's been used so poorly that people just.
Yeah, but your message is it's still an important functional part of your lighting scheme. You just don't cover the entire face. But as you say, it should be as invisible as possible.
Yes. And always, I mean, pretty much always directional. So I always use it to light the walls, the curtains, the picture, and to use it to create.
So it's not necessarily. I mean, obviously in the kitchen you might want specific downlights in order to prevent you dropping your fingers off.
Think about where you're putting them only over the kitchen island when you want that task light. Only over your kitchen units, not just putting grids. They don't have to all match up in the ceiling.
Which now I've heard called developers aptly.
Yes.
It's just.
Yes. 22 all in red.
Yeah. problem. Yeah. And actually, when I look back, for example, my mother always, she never had any uplighting. She didn't have uplighting, but actually, she was sort of wrong. She could have had a few, but again, I guess that was before even had a chicken. I think it sounds like we're pretty much wrapped up. I'm getting a nod from back there. Any final quick questions, or just a big thank you to Lucy and Mike? Thank you very much.